The crying started at midnight. 3 voices, sharp and desperate, cutting through stone walls like knives through silk. The sound traveled down hallways, crept under doorways, and settled into the bones of every wolf in the palace. No one had slept in 6 days. Lydia Ralph pressed her forehead against the cold kitchen wall and tried to breathe through the headache building behind her eyes. She'd been scrubbing floors since dawn, her knees aching, her hands raw from soap and water. The other maids had left an hour ago, but she stayed. Someone had to finish the work. The crying grew louder. She closed her eyes and felt the sound wrap around her chest like a fist squeezing tight. Most wolves in the palace had learned to ignore it, or at least pretend to. They covered their ears, closed their doors, complained loudly about the noise. But Lydia couldn't ignore it. Every cry felt like a small blade sliding between her ribs. "Still here, Omega." Lydia turned. Gundred Mills stood in the doorway, her arms crossed, her expression sharp with irritation. She was a beta, one of the senior housekeepers, and she'd made it clear from Lydia's first day that Omegas belonged in the background where no one had to look at them. "Just finishing," Lydia said quietly. "Well, finish faster. The pups are at it again, and the Alpha King wants all servants on the upper floors out of the way. He's trying another healer." Lydia nodded and wrung out her cleaning rag. Gundred watched her for a moment, then shook her head. 6 days, Gundred muttered. 6 days of screaming. They've tried everything. Nurses, healers, high-ranking she-wolves from the best families. Nothing works. "Maybe they're scared," Lydia said softly. Gundred's eyes narrowed. "Scared, they're pups. They eat and sleep. They don't get scared." Lydia didn't argue. She'd learned a long time ago that arguing only made things worse. She picked up her bucket and moved toward the door, but Gundred didn't step aside. "You stay away from the royal wing," Gundred said. "The Alpha King doesn't need an Omega making things worse." Lydia lowered her eyes. "Yes, ma'am." Gundred finally stepped aside, and Lydia walked past her into the hallway. The crying was louder here, echoing off the stone walls. She could hear voices upstairs, tense and frustrated. Someone was shouting. Someone else was trying to calm them down. She carried her bucket to the storage room and set it down carefully. Her hands were shaking. She didn't know why. She'd heard the pups cry every night for almost a week now, but tonight felt different. Tonight, the sound felt sharper, more desperate. She walked to the servants' staircase and started climbing. She wasn't supposed to go to the upper floors. Gundred had just told her to stay away, but her feet kept moving anyway, carrying her higher, closer to the source of the crying. When she reached the 3rd floor, she stopped. The hallway was crowded with wolves. Servants, guards, elders. They stood outside the nursery door, their faces drawn with exhaustion and worry. Lydia pressed herself against the wall and tried to make herself invisible. Inside the nursery, she could hear voices. "They won't take milk from anyone," a woman said, her voice strained. "We've tried 6 different nurses. They refuse." "They're not hungry." That voice was deeper, quieter. Alpha King Hobbs Richmond. "They're distressed." "Then what do we do?" another voice demanded. "We can't let this continue. The entire pack is suffering." Silence. Then the Alpha King spoke again. "We keep trying." The door opened, and a woman in healer's robes stepped out. Her face was pale, her hands trembling. She looked at the gathered wolves and shook her head. "I don't know what else to do," she said. "I've never seen anything like this." Murmurs rippled through the hallway. Lydia heard someone whisper that the pups were cursed. Someone else said the bloodline was weak. A third voice suggested that the Alpha King had angered the moon herself. Lydia's chest tightened. She wanted to leave, to go back downstairs where she belonged, but her feet wouldn't move. She stood frozen against the wall, listening to the pups cry, feeling the weight of their fear press down on her like a stone. The Alpha King stepped into the hallway. Lydia had never been this close to him before. She'd seen him from a distance, of course. Everyone had. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair and eyes that seemed to see everything. He moved like a wolf who'd never doubted his place in the world, steady and sure. But tonight, he looked tired. His eyes swept over the gathered wolves, taking in their worried faces, their helpless expressions. His jaw tightened. Then his gaze landed on Lydia. She stopped breathing. He didn't look away. He studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Lydia wanted to drop her eyes, to bow her head and disappear, but something kept her still. Maybe it was the exhaustion. Maybe it was the way the pup's cries seemed to pull at something deep inside her chest. "Who are you?" the Alpha King asked. His voice wasn't harsh, just curious, but every wolf in the hallway turned to stare at her. "Lydia Ralph, Your Majesty," she said quietly. "I work in the kitchens." "Why are you here?" Lydia's mouth went dry. She didn't have a good answer. She wasn't supposed to be here. Gundred had told her to stay away, but the truth was the only thing she had. "I heard them crying," she said. "I wanted to help." Someone laughed. It was a short, bitter sound. Lydia felt her cheeks burn, but she kept her eyes on the Alpha King. He didn't laugh. He didn't dismiss her. He just looked at her, and for a moment she thought she saw something in his expression. Recognition, maybe, or understanding. "Go back to the kitchens," he said finally. "There's nothing you can do here." Lydia nodded and turned to leave. But before she could take a step, one of the pups let out a cry so sharp, so raw, that every wolf in the hallway flinched. Lydia's hands curled into fists. She felt her wolf rise inside her, restless and aching. It wanted to go to them. It wanted to soothe them. But she was an Omega. She had no rank, no authority, no place in the royal wing. So she walked away, her heart heavy, and tried to ignore the way the pup's cries followed her all the way down the stairs. By the 8th day, the palace had started to fracture. Servants snapped at each other over small mistakes. Guards stood at their posts with hollow eyes and trembling hands. The elders gathered in the council chambers and spoke in low, urgent voices about omens and bloodlines and the moon's favor. Lydia moved through it all like a ghost. She scrubbed floors, washed dishes, carried linens up and down the stairs. She kept her head down and her voice soft. She didn't complain. She didn't ask questions. She just worked. But at night, when the palace finally fell quiet, she lay in her narrow bed in the servants' quarters and listened to the pups cry. And she cried too, silently, her face buried in her pillow so no one would hear. On the 9th day, everything changed. Lydia was in the laundry room, folding sheets, when Kathleen Hobbs appeared in the doorway. Kathleen was one of the senior caretakers, a stern woman with silver hair and a gaze that could pin a wolf in place. She looked at Lydia for a long moment, then sighed. "Come with me," Kathleen said. Lydia's stomach dropped. Did I do something wrong? "No, just come." Lydia followed Kathleen through the hallways, her heart pounding. They climbed the stairs to the 3rd floor, and Lydia realized with a jolt where they were going. The nursery. "Wait," Lydia said, stopping in the hallway. "I'm not supposed to be here," Gundred said. "I don't care what Gundred said," Kathleen interrupted. "The Alpha King has agreed to try something different." Lydia's breath caught. "Different." Kathleen's expression softened just slightly. "The pups won't settle for anyone. We've tried every ranked wolf in the palace, every healer, every nurse, every she-wolf with royal blood. Nothing works." She paused. "So we're trying you." "Me," Lydia's voice came out as a whisper. "But I'm an Omega. Yes, I know." Kathleen's gaze was steady. "But you're also the only one who hasn't tried yet." Lydia shook her head. "I don't know anything about caring for pups. I work in the kitchens." "You don't need to know anything," Kathleen said. "You just need to try." Before Lydia could respond, the nursery door opened. The Alpha King stepped into the hallway. His eyes found Lydia, and she saw the exhaustion etched into his face. He looked like a man who'd tried everything and found nothing. "Are you willing?" he asked. Lydia's throat tightened. She thought about saying no. She thought about running back to the kitchens, back to her safe, quiet corner of the palace where no one expected anything from her. But then she heard the pups cry, and her wolf stirred inside her chest. "Yes," she said, "I'll try." The Alpha King nodded. He held the door open, and Lydia stepped inside. The nursery, was smaller than she'd expected. 3 cradles sat in a row near the window, each one carved from dark wood and draped with soft blankets. The room smelled of milk and lavender and something else, something raw and afraid. The pups were crying. Lydia moved closer, her steps slow and careful. The first cradle held a pup with dark fur and bright eyes. The second held a smaller pup with lighter fur and a patch of white on its chest. The third held a pup that looked almost identical to the first, but with a small scar above its left eye. They were beautiful. They were also terrified. Lydia could feel it, the fear radiating off them in waves. It wrapped around her like smoke, thick and suffocating. She didn't know why they were afraid. She didn't know what had happened to make them so distressed, but she felt it, deep in her bones, and it broke something inside her. She knelt beside the first cradle and placed her hand gently on the edge. The pup's cries faltered for just a moment, then grew louder. Behind her, she heard someone sigh, a quiet, defeated sound. Lydia closed her eyes and took a slow breath. She didn't try to pick up the pup. She didn't try to force anything. She just stayed there, kneeling beside the cradle, and let the pup feel her presence. Then she started to hum. It wasn't a song. It was just a low, steady sound, soft and rhythmic. She'd done this before, years ago, when she was a child and her younger brother couldn't sleep. Her mother had taught her. A simple hum, a steady breath, a reminder that someone was there. The pup's cries grew quieter. Lydia kept humming. She let her hand rest on the cradle, her touch light and gentle. She didn't look at the Alpha King or Kathleen or anyone else in the room. She just focused on the pup, on the way its breathing started to slow, on the way its small body began to relax. The second pup quieted next. Then the third. And then, for the first time in 9 days, the palace fell silent. Lydia opened her eyes. The pups were still awake, but they weren't crying. They were watching her, their bright eyes curious and calm. The first pup reached out with one tiny paw and brushed against her hand. Lydia's chest tightened. She felt tears sting her eyes, but she blinked them away. Behind her, she heard someone exhale sharply. "Unbelievable," Kathleen whispered. Lydia didn't move. She stayed kneeling beside the cradle, her hand resting gently on the wood, and watched the pups settle into sleep one by one. When she finally stood, her legs were shaking. She turned and found the Alpha King staring at her. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes held something she couldn't name. Surprise, maybe, or relief. "How did you do that?" he asked quietly. Lydia shook her head. "I don't know, I just listened." The Alpha King studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. "Stay," he said. "Stay with them." Lydia's breath caught. "Your Majesty, I—" "Stay," he repeated. His voice was firm but not unkind. "They need you." Lydia looked back at the cradles, at the 3 sleeping pups. Her wolf stirred inside her, warm and protective. "Yes, Your Majesty," she said softly. And just like that, everything changed. Lydia had never spent a full day in the nursery before. She'd never been trusted with anything important. She was an Omega, the lowest rank in the palace hierarchy, and everyone knew Omegas were good for 2 things, cleaning and staying out of the way. But now, as she sat in a wooden chair beside the 3 cradles, she realized how different this was from anything she'd ever done. The pups were awake. They didn't cry, they just watched her with wide, curious eyes. The smallest one, the pup with the white patch on its chest, had crawled closer to the edge of its cradle and was reaching toward her with one tiny paw. Lydia smiled and gently touched its paw with her finger. The pup made a soft sound, almost like a purr, and settled back down. Behind her, the door opened. Lydia turned and saw Kathleen step inside, carrying a tray with milk bottles and clean blankets. The older woman looked at the quiet pups, then at Lydia, and shook her head slowly. "I still don't understand it," Kathleen said. 9 days of screaming and you walk in here and they just stop." Lydia looked down at her hands. "I didn't do anything special." "You did something," Kathleen said firmly. She set the tray down on a small table and crossed her arms. "And now the entire palace is talking about it." Lydia's stomach twisted. Talking about what? About you, about how an Omega managed to calm the Alpha King's pups when no one else could. Kathleen's expression softened slightly. Not everyone's happy about it. Lydia had expected this. She'd spent enough years in the palace to know how wolves thought. Rank mattered. Bloodline mattered. An Omega doing something that ranked wolves couldn't do was an insult to the natural order. It made people uncomfortable. "Should I leave?" Lydia asked quietly. "No," Kathleen's voice was sharp. "The Alpha King wants you here. The pups need you here. What anyone else thinks doesn't matter." Lydia wanted to believe her, but she knew better. She'd seen what happened when wolves felt threatened. They didn't always attack with claws and teeth. Sometimes they used words. Sometimes they used silence. "Just be careful," Kathleen added. "Not everyone will understand this, and not everyone will accept it." She left, and Lydia was alone with the pups again. The hours passed slowly. Lydia fed them when they were hungry, changed their blankets when they were restless, and hummed softly when they seemed uneasy. She didn't try to force them to do anything. She just stayed close, quiet and steady, and let them feel safe. By midday, the smallest pup had crawled out of its cradle and into her lap. Lydia froze. She didn't know if she was supposed to allow this. She didn't know if there were rules about how close an Omega could get to royal pups. But the pup looked up at her with bright, trusting eyes, and she couldn't bring herself to move it away. She placed her hand gently on its back and felt its small heartbeat beneath her palm. "You're safe," she whispered. "I promise." The pup made that soft purring sound again and closed its eyes. Lydia sat there, barely breathing, and felt something shift inside her chest. It was a strange feeling, warm and protective and almost painful in its intensity. She didn't have a name for it. She just knew that she would do anything to keep these pups safe. The door opened again. This time, it wasn't Kathleen. Alpha King Hobbs Richmond stepped into the nursery, his presence filling the room like a storm barely held in check. Lydia's breath caught. She started to stand to bow, but the pup in her lap made a small sound of protest, and she froze. The Alpha King's eyes moved from her face to the pup curled against her chest. His expression didn't change, but Lydia saw something flicker in his gaze. Surprise, maybe, or something softer. "They've settled," he said quietly. "Yes, Your Majesty," Lydia said. Her voice came out steadier than she expected. He moved closer, his steps slow and deliberate. He looked down at the pup in her lap, then at the other two sleeping peacefully in their cradles. His jaw tightened. "9 days," he said. 9 days of trying everything, and you walk in here and they just trust you." Lydia didn't know what to say. She looked down at the pup in her lap and felt its small body rise and fall with each breath. "I didn't do anything," she said softly. "I just stayed." The Alpha King was quiet for a long moment. Then he knelt beside her chair, bringing himself level with her gaze. Lydia's heart stuttered. He was close enough that she could see the exhaustion in his eyes, the lines of worry etched into his face. "Why?" he asked. Lydia blinked. "Why what, Your Majesty?" "Why did you come to the nursery that night? You were told to stay away. You had no reason to be there." Lydia's throat tightened. She thought about lying. She thought about giving him a simple, safe answer. But the truth felt too heavy to keep inside. "I heard them crying," she said, "and I felt it here." She placed her hand over her chest. "It hurt, I couldn't ignore it." The Alpha King studied her face. His gaze was intense, searching. Then he nodded slowly. "You felt their fear," he said. "Yes." "And you wanted to ease it." "Yes." He looked down at the pup in her lap. His expression softened, just slightly, and Lydia saw something in his eyes that made her chest ache. Grief, maybe, or loneliness. "Their mother died in childbirth," he said quietly. "They were born afraid, born grieving something they never even knew." Lydia's breath caught. She looked down at the pup in her arms, at its small, peaceful face, and felt tears sting her eyes. "I'm sorry," she whispered. The Alpha King shook his head. "Don't be. You're giving them something I couldn't, peace." He stood, and Lydia felt the distance between them widen again. He was the Alpha King, the most powerful wolf in the kingdom, and she was just an Omega maid. The moment of closeness was over. But before he left, he turned back to her. "Stay with them," he said, "for as long as they need you." Lydia nodded. "Yes, Your Majesty." He left, and the nursery fell quiet again. Lydia looked down at the pup in her lap and gently stroked its fur. "You're safe," she whispered again. "I promise." The next 3 days passed in a strange, quiet rhythm. Lydia stayed in the nursery from dawn until late at night. She slept in a small cot that Kathleen had brought in, ate her meals quickly between feedings, and barely left the room except to clean herself. The pups had become her entire world. And they were thriving. The smallest pup, the one with the white patch, had started crawling more. It followed Lydia around the room, making soft sounds whenever she moved too far away. The other two were less bold, but they'd started reaching for her whenever they woke, their small paws grasping at her hands. Lydia had never felt needed before, not like this. But outside the nursery, things were changing. She could hear the whispers in the hallways when servants came to deliver supplies. She could see the way some wolves looked at her when she passed, their expressions guarded or resentful. Gundred Mills had stopped speaking to her entirely. Ricka Finch, another senior housekeeper, had made a pointed comment about Omegas overstepping their place. Lydia tried not to think about it. She focused on the pups, on keeping them calm and safe. But the tension in the palace was growing, and she could feel it pressing down on her like a weight. On the 4th day, the elders came. Lydia heard them before she saw them. Heavy footsteps in the hallway, low voices speaking in urgent tones. The nursery door opened, and 3 wolves stepped inside. Marmon Brock, Ephraim Lambert, and Clovis Turlow, the most senior elders in the kingdom. They looked at Lydia with expressions that ranged from curiosity to disapproval. "This is the Omega?" Marmon asked. Kathleen, who had entered behind them, nodded. "Yes, Lydia Ralph." Ephraim's eyes narrowed, and the pups have been calm since she arrived. "Completely," Kathleen said. Clovis moved closer to the cradles and looked down at the sleeping pups. His expression was unreadable. Then he turned to Lydia. "What did you do?" he asked. Lydia's hands trembled. "Nothing, Elder, I just stayed with them." "An Omega," Marmon said slowly. "Calming royal pups, it's unnatural." "Or it's exactly what they needed," Kathleen said sharply. The elders exchanged glances. Lydia felt her wolf stir inside her, restless and defensive. She wanted to tell them that she hadn't done anything wrong. She wanted to explain that the pups had chosen her, not the other way around. But she knew better than to speak without being asked. "The bloodline is strong," Ephraim said finally. "But this situation is unusual. We need to discuss it with the Alpha King." They left, and Lydia let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. Kathleen placed a hand on her shoulder. "Don't worry," Kathleen said. "The Alpha King won't let them take you away from the pups." Lydia nodded, but her stomach was churning. She didn't know what the elders would say. She didn't know what would happen next. All she knew was that the pups needed her. And she wouldn't leave them, not for anything. That night, the Alpha King came to the nursery again. Lydia was sitting in her chair, the smallest pup asleep in her lap, when the door opened. She looked up and saw him standing in the doorway, his expression thoughtful. "They're asleep," she said quietly. "I know." He stepped inside and closed the door behind him. "I wanted to speak with you." Lydia's heart raced. "Of course, Your Majesty." He moved closer and knelt beside her chair again, just like he had before. His gaze moved from the pup in her lap to her face. "The elders are concerned," he said. "They think your presence here is irregular." Lydia's chest tightened. "Do you want me to leave?" "No," his voice was firm. "I want you to stay, but I need you to understand something." He paused. "This palace runs on hierarchy. Rank matters, bloodline matters. An Omega caring for royal pups challenges that order." "I didn't mean to challenge anything," Lydia said softly. "I just wanted to help." "I know," his expression softened. "And you have, but there will be consequences. Wolves will talk. Some will resent you, others will try to undermine you. Lydia looked down at the pup in her lap. Its small body rose and fell with each breath, peaceful and trusting. I don't care what they say, she said quietly, as long as the pups are safe. The Alpha King studied her face for a long moment. Then he reached out and gently touched the pup's head. His hand was large and rough, but his touch was surprisingly gentle. You're different, he said. Most wolves in this palace care about rank and power, but you don't, you just care. Lydia didn't know how to respond. She felt heat rise to her cheeks and looked away. I'm just doing what feels right, she said. That's what makes you different. He stood, and Lydia felt the distance between them widen again. But this time, it felt different. Less like a wall and more like a space waiting to be crossed. Stay with them, he said. I'll handle the elders. Thank you, Your Majesty. He nodded and turned to leave. But before he reached the door, he stopped and looked back at her. My name is Hobbs, he said quietly. You don't have to call me Your Majesty when we're alone. Lydia's breath caught. I don't think that's appropriate. Maybe not, he said, but I'm asking you to anyway. He left, and Lydia sat in the quiet nursery, her heart pounding, the smallest pup still asleep in her lap. She didn't understand what was happening. She didn't understand why the Alpha King treated her differently than everyone else did. But she felt something shifting inside her, something warm and unfamiliar. Hope, maybe. Or something even more dangerous. The palace had started to breathe again. Servants moved through the hallways without the weight of exhaustion dragging at their steps. Guards stood at their posts with clear eyes and steady hands. The elders no longer gathered in urgent, whispered meetings. The crying had stopped, and with it, the fear that had gripped the kingdom for 9 long days. But peace came with a price. Lydia felt the stares now. Everywhere she went, wolves watched her. Some with curiosity, some with suspicion, and some with something colder. Resentment. She tried to ignore it, tried to focus on the pups and her work, but the tension followed her like a shadow. She was in the nursery, feeding the middle pup, when she heard raised voices in the hallway. This is unacceptable, a male voice said sharply. An Omega shouldn't be anywhere near royal pups, let alone caring for them. The Alpha King has made his decision, Kathleen's voice responded, firm and unyielding. And it's not your place to question it. It's everyone's place to question it when the natural order is being destroyed. Lydia's hands trembled. She set down the milk bottle and gently placed the pup back in its cradle. The voices grew louder, and she recognized the second speaker now. Isaac Mills, Gundred's brother, a ranked wolf with strong opinions and little patience for anything that challenged tradition. The door opened, and Isaac stepped inside. He was tall and broad, with sharp features and cold eyes. Behind him, Wyatt Finch followed, his expression equally hostile. Kathleen tried to step between them and Lydia, but Isaac moved past her without hesitation. So this is the Omega everyone's talking about, Isaac said, looking Lydia up and down like she was something distasteful. You don't look like much. Lydia kept her eyes down. I'm just here to help the pups. Help them, Wyatt laughed. It was a harsh, bitter sound. You're confusing them. Royal pups shouldn't bond with an Omega. It weakens them. That's enough, Kathleen said sharply. Get out, both of you. Isaac ignored her. He moved closer to Lydia, and she felt her wolf stir inside her, defensive and afraid. But she didn't move. She didn't speak. She just stood there, keeping herself between Isaac and the cradles. You think you're special now? Isaac asked quietly. You think because the Alpha King lets you stay here, you're suddenly more than what you are. Lydia's throat tightened. I don't think I'm special. Good, because you're not. You're an Omega. You're meant to serve, not to raise the future leaders of this kingdom. That's enough. The voice that cut through the room was cold and commanding. Lydia looked up and saw the Alpha King standing in the doorway. His expression was calm, but his eyes burned with barely controlled anger. Isaac and Wyatt immediately stepped back, their heads lowering in submission. Your Majesty, Isaac said quickly, we were just questioning my authority, Hobbs finished. He stepped into the room, and the air seemed to shift around him. Is that what you were doing? No, Your Majesty, Wyatt said. We're concerned about the pups, about tradition, about your own discomfort, Hobbs interrupted. His gaze moved to Isaac. You don't like that an Omega succeeded where you failed. That's what this is really about. Isaac's jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. Hobbs moved closer to Lydia. He didn't touch her, but he positioned himself between her and the two ranked wolves, a clear message of protection. Lydia Ralph is under my direct authority, Hobbs said quietly. She will continue caring for my pups for as long as they need her. Anyone who questions this decision is questioning me, and I don't tolerate that. The room fell silent. Isaac and Wyatt exchanged glances, then bowed their heads. Understood, Your Majesty, Isaac said. Get out, Hobbs said. They left quickly, and the door closed behind them with a soft click. Kathleen let out a breath and pressed her hand to her chest. That could have been worse, Kathleen muttered. Hobbs turned to Lydia. His expression softened slightly, though the tension in his shoulders remained. Are you hurt? He asked. Lydia shook her head. No, I'm fine. They shouldn't have spoken to you that way. It's all right, Lydia said quietly. I'm used to it. Hobbs's jaw tightened. You shouldn't be. He looked at the pups, then back at Lydia. For a moment, she thought he might say something more, but instead, he just nodded and turned to leave. Wait, Lydia said. He stopped. Thank you, she said softly, for defending me. Hobbs looked at her for a long moment. Then he smiled just slightly. It was the first time she'd seen him smile, and it changed his entire face. He looked younger, less burdened. You're taking care of my children, he said. Of course I'll defend you. He left, and Lydia stood in the quiet nursery, her heart pounding. She didn't understand what was happening between them. She didn't understand why he looked at her the way he did, or why his presence made her feel safe and nervous all at once. But she knew one thing for certain. Something was changing, and there was no going back. The next morning, Lydia woke to find a package waiting outside the nursery door. It was wrapped in soft cloth and tied with a simple ribbon. She picked it up carefully and carried it inside. The pups were still asleep, so she sat in her chair and unwrapped the package slowly. Inside was a dress. It was beautiful, simple but well-made, with soft fabric and careful stitching. It was the kind of dress a ranked wolf might wear, not an Omega Maid. Lydia stared at it, her hands trembling, and found a small note tucked inside the fabric. For your service to the kingdom, HR. Lydia's breath caught. She looked at the dress, then at the note, and felt something warm bloom in her chest. He'd thought of her. The Alpha King, with all his responsibilities and burdens, had thought of her. She folded the dress carefully and set it aside. She didn't know when she'd wear it. She didn't know if she should wear it. But she kept it close, and every time she looked at it, she felt that same warm feeling spread through her chest. The days continued to pass, and Lydia settled into a routine. She woke early, fed the pups, cleaned the nursery, and spent hours sitting with them as they played and explored. The smallest pup had started walking now, wobbling on unsteady legs but determined to follow Lydia wherever she went. The other two were less adventurous, but they'd started making sounds that almost resembled words. Lydia loved them, completely and without reservation. They weren't her pups, and she knew she'd have to give them back eventually. But for now, they were hers to protect, hers to love. And she wasn't the only one who noticed. Hobbs came to the nursery every evening now. He'd sit in the chair across from Lydia and watch the pups play. Sometimes he spoke. Sometimes he just sat in comfortable silence. But he was always there, steady and constant. One evening, after the pups had fallen asleep, he looked at Lydia and asked a question she hadn't expected. Are you happy here? Lydia blinked. In the nursery. In the palace, he said, with your life. She thought about it. She thought about the years she'd spent scrubbing floors and washing dishes, about the way other wolves looked through her like she didn't exist. She thought about the loneliness, the constant feeling of being less than everyone around her. I'm happier now, she said honestly. With the pups, this feels right. Hobbs nodded slowly. You're good with them, better than anyone I've ever seen. They're easy to love, Lydia said softly. Most wolves don't think so. He leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees. Most wolves see them as responsibilities, duties, but you see them as, what? Children. Yes, Lydia said. That's all they are, children who need love. Hobbs studied her face. You're different, Lydia, from everyone else in this palace. You don't care about rank or power or bloodlines. You just care. Lydia felt heat rise to her cheeks. I'm just doing what anyone would do. No, Hobbs said quietly. You're doing what only you would do. They sat in silence for a moment. Then Hobbs stood and moved toward the door. Wait, Lydia said. He turned. The dress, she said. Thank you, it was kind. Hobbs smiled, that same small smile that changed his entire face. You deserve kindness, he said. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. He left, and Lydia sat alone in the nursery, her heart full and her mind racing. She didn't know what this was. She didn't know where it was going, but she knew one thing for certain. She was falling for the Alpha King. And she had no idea what to do about it. 3 weeks had passed since Lydia first walked into the nursery. 3 weeks of peace. 3 weeks of quiet mornings and gentle evenings. 3 weeks of watching the pups grow stronger, braver, more curious about the world around them. But peace in the palace was fragile. Lydia felt it in the way servants whispered when she walked past. She felt it in the cold stares from ranked wolves who resented her presence. She felt it in the tension that seemed to hum beneath every conversation, every glance, every word. The pups had bonded with her completely. The smallest one, the pup with the white patch, refused to sleep unless Lydia was in the room. The middle pup had started following her around like a shadow, making soft sounds whenever she moved too far away. And the largest pup, the one with the scar above its eye, had begun reaching for her first thing every morning, its small paws grasping at her hands. They loved her, and she loved them. But love, in a palace built on hierarchy and tradition, was dangerous. Lydia was folding clean blankets one afternoon when Kathleen entered the nursery, her expression troubled. The elders want to speak with you, Kathleen said quietly. Lydia's stomach dropped. Why? They're concerned about your influence on the pups. Kathleen's voice was careful, measured. They want to evaluate the situation. Evaluate? Lydia's hands trembled. What does that mean? It means they want to see if you're still necessary. Kathleen crossed her arms. The pups are thriving now. Some wolves think you've served your purpose. Lydia looked at the 3 cradles, at the sleeping pups she'd cared for day and night for weeks. Her throat tightened. They still need me, she said softly. I know, Kathleen said, but the elders don't see it that way. They see an Omega who's become too important, and that makes them uncomfortable. Lydia felt her wolf stir inside her, restless and afraid. She'd known this was coming. She'd known the peace couldn't last, but knowing didn't make it easier. When do they want to see me? She asked. Tomorrow morning, in the council chambers. Lydia nodded slowly. All right. Kathleen placed a hand on her shoulder. Don't worry, the Alpha King won't let them take you away from the pups. But Lydia wasn't so sure. That evening, Hobbs came to the nursery later than usual. Lydia was sitting in her chair, the smallest pup curled in her lap when he entered. He looked tired, more tired than she'd seen him in days. His shoulders were tense, his jaw tight. You heard, he said quietly. It wasn't a question. Yes, Lydia said. Hobbs crossed the room and knelt beside her chair. He looked at the pup in her lap, then at her face. The elders are pushing back, he said. They think your presence here undermines pack structure. They want you removed. Lydia's chest tightened. What do you think? I think they're afraid, Hobbs said. Afraid of change. Afraid of what it means that an Omega succeeded where everyone else failed. But they're right, aren't they? Lydia's voice was barely a whisper. I'm just an Omega. I don't belong here. Hobbs reached out and gently touched her hand. His fingers were warm and rough, and Lydia felt her breath catch. "You belong here more than anyone," he said quietly. "The pups chose you, they trust you, they need you." "But for how long?" Lydia asked. "They're getting stronger, soon they won't need me anymore." "Maybe not," Hobbs said, "but I will." Lydia's heart stuttered. She looked up at him, and for the first time she saw something in his eyes that made her chest ache. Vulnerability, loneliness, hope. "I don't understand," she whispered. "Neither do I," Hobbs said. He smiled just slightly. "But I know that when I'm with you I feel lighter, like I can breathe." Lydia didn't know what to say. She'd never had anyone speak to her like this before. She'd never felt important to anyone. "I'm just a maid," she said softly. "No," Hobbs said firmly. "You're the woman who saved my children. You're the woman who brought peace to my kingdom. He paused. "You're more than you think you are." He stood, and Lydia felt the distance between them widen again. But this time, it didn't feel like a wall. It felt like a bridge waiting to be crossed. "I'll handle the elders," Hobbs said. "You just focus on the pups." "Thank you," Lydia whispered. He nodded and left, and Lydia sat in the quiet nursery, her heart pounding, the smallest pup still curled peacefully in her lap. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring. She didn't know if the elders would force her to leave. But she knew one thing for certain. She wasn't alone anymore. The council chambers were colder than Lydia had expected. She stood in the center of the room, her hands clasped in front of her, while 5 elders sat in a semicircle around her. Marmon Brock, Ephraim Lambert, Clovis Turlow, and 2 others she didn't recognize. Their expressions ranged from curiosity to disapproval. Hobbs stood to the side, his arms crossed, his gaze steady. "Lydia Ralph," Marmon began, "you've been caring for the Alpha King's pups for 3 weeks now. Is that correct?" "Yes, Elder," Lydia said quietly. "And in that time, the pups have shown remarkable improvement. They're calm, healthy, and thriving." "Yes, Elder." "Which raises an interesting question." Marmon leaned forward. "Why? What makes you different from every other wolf who tried to care for them?" Lydia swallowed hard. "I don't know, Elder, I just listened to them." "Listened," Clovis repeated. "What does that mean?" "I felt their fear," Lydia said. "I tried to ease it." The elders exchanged glances. Ephraim spoke next, his voice measured. "An Omega's bond with royal pups is unusual. Some might say unnatural. Some might say it's exactly what was needed," Hobbs said quietly. The elders turned to look at him. Marmon's expression hardened. "With respect, Your Majesty, this situation challenges tradition. An Omega caring for future leaders could have consequences we haven't foreseen." "What consequences?" Hobbs asked. His voice was calm, but Lydia heard the steel beneath it. "The pups are healthy. They're happy. What more do you want?" "We want to ensure the bloodline remains strong," Clovis said. "We want to ensure the pups develop properly without confusion." "Confusion," Hobbs's eyes narrowed. "You think Lydia is confusing them?" "We think her influence might make them dependent," Marmon said. "Weak." Lydia felt something twist inside her chest. She wanted to defend herself. She wanted to tell them that the pups weren't weak, that they were strong and brave and full of life. But she knew better than to speak without being asked. "Lydia," Ephraim said, "do you believe the pups still need you?" Lydia looked at the elders, then at Hobbs. His gaze was steady, encouraging. "Yes," she said quietly, "they do." "Why?" "Because they're still children," Lydia said. "They're still learning how to trust the world, and they trust me." "But they could learn to trust others," Marmon said. "Ranked wolves, wolves who understand their responsibilities." "Maybe," Lydia said. "But right now, they need someone who understands their hearts." The room fell silent. Then Hobbs spoke. "Lydia stays," he said firmly. "The pups need her, I need her, and I won't let tradition destroy what's working." Marmon's jaw tightened. "Your Majesty." "This discussion is over," Hobbs interrupted. "Lydia will continue caring for my pups. Anyone who has a problem with that can bring it to me directly." The elders exchanged glances, but none of them argued. They knew better than to push the Alpha King too far. "Dismissed," Hobbs said. Lydia left the council chambers, her legs shaking, her heart pounding. She didn't know what had just happened. She didn't know if she'd won or if the fight was just beginning. But as she walked back to the nursery, she felt something new stirring inside her. Strength. And for the first time in her life, she believed she deserved to be here. The palace had turned against her. It wasn't obvious at first. No one shouted at Lydia or confronted her directly, but she felt it in the small things. The way conversations stopped when she entered a room, the way servants no longer met her eyes, the way doors closed just a little too quickly when she walked past. She was being isolated. Lydia tried not to let it bother her. She focused on the pups, on their needs and their laughter and their growing curiosity about the world. But at night, when the nursery was quiet and the pups were asleep, she felt the loneliness creep in like cold water. She missed the simple days when she was just a maid, when no one expected anything from her, when she could disappear into her work and be forgotten. But those days were gone. One morning, Gundred Mills cornered her in the hallway outside the nursery. "You've made quite a mess, haven't you?" Gundred said, her arms crossed, her expression hard. Lydia kept her eyes down. "I don't know what you mean." "Don't play innocent with me. You've turned this entire palace upside down. Omegas aren't supposed to be important. We're supposed to serve quietly and stay out of the way. But you've made yourself indispensable." "I didn't try to," Lydia said softly. "That doesn't matter." Gundred stepped closer, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "The other servants hate you. The ranked wolves hate you. Even some of the elders want you gone. You've made enemies, Lydia, and enemies in this palace are dangerous." Lydia's throat tightened. "I'm just trying to care for the pups." "You're trying to rise above your station," Gundred snapped. "And you'll pay for it, mark my words." She walked away, and Lydia stood alone in the hallway, her hands trembling. She'd known this would happen. She'd known that caring for the pups would make her a target, but knowing didn't make it easier. That afternoon, Valerie Doolin approached her in the nursery. Valerie was different from Gundred. She was younger, quieter, and had always treated Lydia with a kind of distant politeness. But today, her expression was troubled. "Can I speak with you?" Valerie asked. Lydia nodded and set down the blanket she'd been folding. "Of course." Valerie glanced at the door, then moved closer. "I wanted to warn you. There's talk among the servants. Some wolves are planning to petition the Alpha King to have you removed." Lydia's stomach dropped. "Why?" "They say you've become too close to the pups, that you're overstepping your place." Valerie's voice was gentle, but her words cut deep. "They're saying you're dangerous." "Dangerous?" Lydia's voice came out as a whisper. "I would never hurt the pups." "I know," Valerie said quickly. "But they're not worried about the pups being hurt. They're worried about you gaining power." Lydia shook her head. "I don't want power, I just want the pups to be safe." "I believe you," Valerie said, "but others don't, and they're willing to do whatever it takes to get rid of you." Lydia felt her wolf stir inside her, restless and afraid. She looked at the pups playing peacefully in their cradles, at their bright eyes and trusting faces. "What should I do?" she asked. Valerie hesitated. "I don't know, but be careful, and maybe keep your distance from the Alpha King." Lydia's breath caught. "Why?" "Because people are noticing," Valerie said quietly. "The way he looks at you, the way he defends you, it's making things worse." She left, and Lydia stood alone in the nursery, her heart pounding. She'd been so focused on the pups that she hadn't thought about how her relationship with Hobbs might look to others. She hadn't realized that his kindness, his protection, his attention could be used against her. But now she understood. She wasn't just fighting for her place in the nursery. She was fighting for her place in Hobbs's life, and that was a battle she didn't know how to win. That evening, Hobbs came to the nursery as usual. But this time, Lydia didn't smile when he entered. She didn't meet his eyes. She just kept folding blankets, her movements stiff and mechanical. "Is something wrong?" Hobbs asked. "No," Lydia said quietly. "You're lying." Lydia's hands stilled. She took a slow breath and forced herself to look at him. "People are talking," she said, "about us." Hobbs's expression darkened. "What are they saying?" "That I'm overstepping, that I'm dangerous." Lydia's voice trembled. "They're trying to get rid of me." "Let them try," Hobbs said firmly. "I won't let anyone take you away from the pups." "But maybe they're right," Lydia said. "Maybe I am overstepping. Maybe I don't belong here." Hobbs crossed the room in 3 long strides and knelt in front of her. He took her hands in his, and Lydia felt her breath catch. "Listen to me," he said quietly. "You belong here more than anyone. The pups need you, I need you, and I don't care what anyone else thinks." "But they hate me," Lydia whispered. "The servants, the ranked wolves, the elders, they all want me gone." "Then let them hate you," Hobbs said. "As long as you're doing what's right, their opinions don't matter." Lydia shook her head. "But it does matter, because their opinions affect you. They're questioning your judgment. They're saying you've lost control." "I don't care," Hobbs said. "But I do." Lydia pulled her hands away and stood. "I care because I don't want to be the reason you lose their respect. I don't want to be the reason your authority is questioned." Hobbs stood as well, his expression intense. "Then what do you want?" Lydia's throat tightened. She looked at the pups, at their peaceful, sleeping faces, and felt tears sting her eyes. "I want them to be safe," she said softly. "I want them to grow up strong and loved, and if that means I have to leave." "No," Hobbs said firmly. "You're not leaving." "But—" "No." He moved closer, and Lydia felt the heat of his presence wrap around her like a blanket. "You're staying, and we'll face whatever comes together." Lydia looked up at him, and for the first time, she saw something in his eyes that made her heart ache. Not just kindness or respect or gratitude. Love. "Hobbs," she whispered. "I know," he said quietly. "I know this is complicated. I know we're breaking every rule. But I don't care anymore, Lydia. I care about you, and I'm not letting you go." Lydia felt tears slip down her cheeks. She didn't know what to say. She didn't know how to respond to something so overwhelming, so unexpected, so impossible. So she just stood there, and Hobbs reached out and gently wiped her tears away. "We'll figure this out," he said. "I promise." And for the first time in weeks, Lydia believed him. The next morning, everything changed. Lydia woke to find a letter slipped under the nursery door. It was written in careful script on thick paper, and it bore the seal of the Elders' Council. Her hands trembled as she opened it and read. "Lydia Ralph, you are hereby offered a promotion to ranked servant status, effective immediately. This promotion comes with increased responsibilities, better living quarters, and a position within the palace administration. However, this promotion requires you to relinquish your duties in the royal nursery. The Alpha King's pups are thriving and no longer require constant attention. Your services are better suited elsewhere. This is an opportunity for advancement. We trust you will make the right choice. Respectfully, the Elders' Council." Lydia read the letter 3 times, her heart sinking with each pass. They were offering her everything she'd never had: rank, respect, a place in the palace that wasn't at the bottom, but they were asking her to give up the only thing that mattered. The pups. She looked at the 3 cradles, at the sleeping faces of the children she'd come to love. The smallest pup stirred and reached out with one tiny paw, searching for her even in sleep. Lydia's decision was made before she even finished reading the letter. She crumpled the paper in her fist and threw it in the fire. She wasn't leaving. Not for rank, not for respect, not for anything. The pups needed her, and she needed them. And no one, not even the elders, could make her walk away. The letter changed everything. Word spread quickly that Lydia had refused the elders' offer. Some wolves were shocked, others were angry. A few even whispered that she was foolish, throwing away her only chance at a better life for a position that wouldn't last. But Lydia didn't care. She'd made her choice, and she wouldn't apologize for it. The pups were growing stronger every day. The smallest one had started walking without wobbling. The middle pup had begun making sounds that almost resembled words, and the largest pup had developed a protective streak, always positioning itself between Lydia and the door whenever someone entered. They were becoming more independent, but they still needed her, especially at night. Every evening, after the sun had set and the palace had grown quiet, the pups would settle down only if Lydia was with them. She'd sit in her chair and hum softly, and one by one, they'd climb out of their cradles and curl up around her feet. It was during one of these quiet nights that Hobbs found her. Lydia had dozed off in her chair, exhausted from a long day. She didn't hear the door open. She didn't hear his footsteps crossing the room. She only woke when she felt a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Lydia," Hobbs said softly. She opened her eyes and found him kneeling beside her chair. The pups were asleep around her feet, their small bodies pressed against each other for warmth. The nursery was bathed in moonlight, peaceful and still. "I'm sorry," Lydia whispered. "I didn't mean to fall asleep." "Don't apologize," Hobbs said. "You work harder than anyone in this palace." Lydia looked down at the pups. They had a big day. They were playing until they couldn't keep their eyes open anymore. Hobbs smiled. It was a real smile, warm and genuine, and it made Lydia's heart skip. "I heard what you did," he said. "The letter, the offer." Lydia's chest tightened. "I couldn't leave them." "I know." Hobbs reached out and gently touched one of the pups, his large hand careful and tender. "But you gave up something important. Rank, status, a better life." "This is a better life," Lydia said quietly. "Being here with them, it's everything I never knew I wanted." Hobbs looked at her, and Lydia saw something shift in his expression, something deep and unguarded. "You're extraordinary," he said softly. "Do you know that?" Lydia shook her head. "I'm just doing what feels right." "That's what makes you extraordinary," Hobbs said. "Most wolves in this palace do what benefits them, what increases their power or status. But you do what's right, even when it costs you everything." Lydia felt heat rise to her cheeks. She looked away, but Hobbs reached out and gently turned her face back toward him. "I meant what I said before," he said quietly. "I care about you, Lydia, more than I should, more than is probably wise." Lydia's breath caught. "Hobbs, I know all the reasons this is impossible," he continued. "I'm the Alpha King, you're an Omega. There are rules, traditions, expectations. But when I'm with you, none of that matters. When I'm with you, I feel free." Lydia didn't know what to say. She'd never imagined someone like him could feel this way about someone like her. It felt impossible. Like a dream she'd wake up from any moment. "I don't understand," she whispered. "Why me?" "Because you see me," Hobbs said simply. "Not the Alpha King, not the title or the power, you see me. The man who's tired and lonely and trying his best to be a good father. You see me and you don't turn away." Lydia felt tears sting her eyes. "I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to be what you need." "You already are," Hobbs said. He leaned forward and pressed his forehead gently against hers. "You already are." They stayed like that for a long moment, breathing together in the quiet nursery, the pups sleeping peacefully at their feet. Lydia felt something settle inside her chest, something warm and certain. This was right. This was where she belonged. Not because of rank or status or tradition, but because her heart had chosen him, and his heart had chosen her. "Stay with me," Hobbs whispered. "Not just with the pups, with me." Lydia closed her eyes. "Yes. Even if it's complicated." "Yes. Even if people hate you for it." "Yes." Lydia opened her eyes and looked at him. "I'll stay with you for as long as you'll have me." Hobbs smiled, and it was the most beautiful thing Lydia had ever seen. "Then I'll have you forever," he said. He kissed her forehead, gentle and reverent, and Lydia felt her heart swell with something she'd never felt before. Hope, joy, love. They sat together in the moonlit nursery, surrounded by sleeping pups, and Lydia realized something profound. She'd spent her whole life feeling invisible, feeling less than, feeling like she didn't matter. But here, in this moment, with Hobbs beside her and the pups at her feet, she felt seen. She felt valued. She felt loved, and that changed everything. The next morning, the palace woke to a new reality. The Alpha King had made his choice. He'd chosen Lydia, not just as a caretaker for his pups, but as something more, something important. The servants whispered. The ranked wolves frowned. The elders gathered in their chambers and spoke in low, worried tones. But Hobbs didn't care. He walked through the palace with Lydia at his side, his hand resting lightly on her back, a clear statement of protection and respect. He introduced her to visiting dignitaries as someone essential to his household. He defended her publicly when anyone dared to question her presence. And slowly, the palace began to shift. Some wolves still resented Lydia. Some still whispered behind her back, but others began to see what Hobbs saw. They saw her kindness, her dedication, her quiet strength. They saw how the pups thrived under her care, how they laughed and played and grew braver every day. And they began to wonder if maybe, just maybe, rank didn't matter as much as they'd always thought. Lydia felt the change like sunlight breaking through clouds. It wasn't complete, it wasn't perfect, but it was something. One afternoon, as she was carrying the smallest pup through the palace gardens, she ran into Pearl Bonner, one of the senior caretakers. Pearl had never been unkind to Lydia, but she'd never been friendly either. She'd kept her distance, watching from afar with a careful, guarded expression. But today, Pearl stopped and smiled. "The pup looks happy," Pearl said. Lydia nodded. "It's a beautiful day. I thought the fresh air would be good." Pearl studied her for a moment. "You've done well with them, better than anyone expected." "Thank you," Lydia said quietly. "I'm sorry," Pearl said suddenly. "For the way some of us treated you. You didn't deserve that." Lydia's throat tightened. "It's all right." "No, it's not," Pearl said firmly. "We should have supported you. Instead, we made things harder. I'm sorry." Lydia felt tears prick her eyes, but she blinked them away. "Thank you. That means a lot." Pearl nodded and walked away, and Lydia stood in the garden, the smallest pup nestled in her arms, feeling something warm and healing spread through her chest. Forgiveness, acceptance, belonging. She'd found her place, not because she'd fought for it, but because she'd stayed true to herself. She'd chosen love over status, connection over power, and somehow, that had been enough. That night, Hobbs came to the nursery later than usual. The pups were already asleep, and Lydia was sitting in her chair, mending a torn blanket. She looked up when he entered and saw the exhaustion in his eyes. "Rough day?" she asked softly. Hobbs nodded. "The elders are still pushing back. They don't like change." "I'm sorry," Lydia said. "Don't be." Hobbs moved closer and sat on the floor beside her chair. He leaned his head back against the armrest and closed his eyes. "You're the best thing that's happened to this kingdom in a long time." Lydia set down her sewing and gently placed her hand on his shoulder. "You're tired." "I am," he admitted, "but when I'm here with you and the pups, I feel peaceful." Lydia smiled. "Then stay." "I will," Hobbs said. He opened his eyes and looked up at her. "For as long as you'll let me." "Forever," Lydia said softly. Hobbs reached up and took her hand. He brought it to his lips and kissed her knuckles gently. "Forever," he repeated. They sat together in the quiet nursery, surrounded by the soft sounds of sleeping pups, and Lydia felt something settle deep inside her soul. This was her family. This was her home. And nothing, not rank or tradition or fear, could take that away. Spring came to the kingdom like a promise. The snow melted, the flowers bloomed, and the palace seemed to breathe easier. The tension that had gripped the wolves for months began to fade, replaced by something lighter, something hopeful. The pups were thriving. They were 6 months old now, walking confidently, playing with endless energy, and starting to speak in simple words. The smallest pup, the one with the white patch, had become incredibly affectionate, following Lydia everywhere and demanding her attention constantly. The middle pup was curious, always exploring new corners of the nursery and asking questions about everything. And the largest pup, the one with the scar, had developed a protective nature, always watching the door and positioning itself between Lydia and any perceived threat. Lydia loved them more than she'd ever thought possible. But she knew this season wouldn't last forever. The pups were growing. Soon they'd be old enough for formal training, for tutors and lessons, and all the responsibilities that came with being royal. Soon they wouldn't need her the way they did now. The thought made her chest ache. One morning, as she was helping the pups eat breakfast, Hobbs entered the nursery with a serious expression. "Can we talk?" he asked. Lydia nodded and followed him into the hallway, leaving Kathleen to watch the pups. Hobbs led her to a small sitting room nearby and closed the door behind them. "What's wrong?" Lydia asked. "Nothing's wrong," Hobbs said. He took her hands in his. "But we need to discuss the future." Lydia's heart sank. "You want me to leave?" "What? No." Hobbs's grip tightened. "Never. I want you to stay, but we need to decide what that looks like." Lydia blinked. "I don't understand." Hobbs took a slow breath. "The pups are growing. Soon they'll need less hands-on care and more formal education. Your role will change, and I want to make sure you're comfortable with that." "I'll do whatever they need," Lydia said quickly. "I know," Hobbs said, "but that's not what I'm asking. I'm asking what you want. What would make you happy?" Lydia stared at him. No one had ever asked her that before. No one had ever cared what she wanted. "I want to stay with them," she said softly. "In whatever way I can. I don't care if my role changes. I just want to be part of their lives." Hobbs smiled. "Good, because I want you to be part of their lives too, and mine." Lydia's breath caught. "What do you mean?" Hobbs reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. He opened it to reveal a simple silver ring, delicate and beautiful. "I want you to be my partner," he said quietly. "Not just the pup's caretaker, not just someone I care about. I want you to be my equal, my mate." Lydia felt tears spill down her cheeks. "Hobbs." "I know this isn't traditional," he continued. "I know there will be challenges, but I don't care. I love you, Lydia, and I want to build a life with you." Lydia looked at the ring, then at Hobbs, and felt something break open inside her chest. All the years of feeling invisible, of feeling less than, of believing she didn't deserve good things, it all crumbled away. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I'll be your mate." Hobbs's face lit up with joy. He slipped the ring onto her finger and pulled her into his arms. Lydia buried her face in his chest and cried, overwhelmed by happiness and relief and love. "I love you," she whispered. "I love you too," Hobbs said. He kissed the top of her head. "Forever." The news spread through the palace like wildfire. The Alpha King had chosen an Omega as his mate. Some wolves were shocked, others were angry, but many were quietly pleased. They'd seen how Lydia had changed the kingdom, how she'd brought peace and stability and love. They'd seen how the Alpha King looked at her, how he smiled more, how he seemed lighter. And they began to understand that maybe, just maybe, love was more important than rank. The elders called a meeting. Hobbs attended with Lydia at his side, his hand holding hers firmly. The elders sat in their usual semicircle, their expressions ranging from disapproving to cautiously accepting. "Your Majesty," Marmon began, "this is unprecedented." "I'm aware," Hobbs said calmly. "An Omega as the Alpha King's mate," Clovis said slowly. "It challenges every tradition we have." "Good," Hobbs said. "Some traditions need to be challenged." "But what about the pack structure?" Ephraim asked. "What about hierarchy?" "The pack structure will survive," Hobbs said firmly. "Because it's built on more than rank. It's built on loyalty, respect, and love, and Lydia embodies all of that." The elders exchanged glances. Then Marmon sighed. "You're asking us to accept something that goes against everything we've known," he said. "I'm not asking," Hobbs said quietly. "I'm telling you, Lydia is my mate. She'll be honored and respected, and anyone who has a problem with that can take it up with me." The room fell silent. Then slowly, Clovis stood. He looked at Lydia, his expression unreadable. Then he bowed his head. "If she makes you happy, Your Majesty," he said, "then I support your choice." One by one, the other elders stood and bowed their heads. Some did so reluctantly, others with genuine respect, but they all acknowledged her. Lydia felt tears sting her eyes. She squeezed Hobbs's hand, and he squeezed back. They'd won. The bonding ceremony was small and private. Just Hobbs, Lydia, Kathleen, and a few trusted wolves. They stood in the palace gardens under the full moon, surrounded by blooming flowers and the soft sounds of night. Hobbs spoke his vows first. "I promise to honor you," he said, his voice steady and sure. "To protect you, to listen to you, to choose you every day for the rest of my life. You've given me peace. You've given me hope. And I'll spend every day proving that you made the right choice." Lydia's throat tightened. She took a slow breath and spoke her own vows. "I promise to stand beside you," she said softly. "To support you, to love you, to be your partner in everything. You've given me a place to belong. You've given me a family, and I'll spend every day being worthy of that gift." Hobbs smiled and slipped a second ring onto her finger, matching the first. Then he leaned down and kissed her, gentle and reverent. The small gathering applauded, and Lydia felt happiness bloom in her chest like sunlight. She was no longer just an Omega maid. She was the Alpha King's mate. She was the Pups' chosen mother. She was valued and loved and seen. And that was everything. 6 months later, the palace had transformed. The Pups were a year old now, walking confidently and speaking in full sentences. They called Lydia Mama and followed her everywhere. They called Hobbs Papa and climbed on him whenever he sat down. They were a family. Lydia had taken on new responsibilities as the Alpha King's mate. She attended council meetings, offered her perspective on pack matters, and worked to improve conditions for Omegas throughout the kingdom. She didn't do it because she wanted power. She did it because she knew what it felt like to be invisible, and she wanted to make sure no one else had to feel that way. And slowly, the kingdom changed. Omegas were given more opportunities. Their voices were heard in ways they'd never been before. The rigid hierarchy began to soften, replaced by something more flexible, more compassionate. It wasn't perfect. Change never was, but it was progress. One evening, as Lydia was putting the Pups to bed, the smallest one looked up at her with bright, curious eyes. "Mama," it said, "do you love us?" Lydia smiled and gently stroked its fur. "More than anything in the world. Even more than Papa." Lydia laughed softly. "I love you and Papa the same. You're both my everything." The pup seemed satisfied with that answer and curled up under its blanket. Lydia kissed its forehead, then moved to the other 2 pups and did the same. "Good night, my loves," she whispered. "Good night, Mama," they chorused. Lydia left the nursery and found Hobbs waiting in the hallway. He smiled and pulled her into his arms. "How are they?" he asked. "Perfect," Lydia said, "as always." Hobbs kissed her forehead. "Come with me, I want to show you something." He led her to the palace balcony, where they could see the entire kingdom spread out below them. The moon was full and bright, casting silver light over everything. "Look," Hobbs said, pointing to the distant hills. "Do you see the lights?" Lydia looked and saw small fires dotting the landscape. "What are they?" "Villages celebrating," Hobbs said. "It's the spring festival, a tradition to welcome the new season." Lydia smiled. "It's beautiful." "It is," Hobbs agreed. He wrapped his arms around her from behind and rested his chin on her shoulder. "And it's all because of you." "Me," Lydia laughed. "I didn't do anything." "You did everything," Hobbs said quietly. "You brought peace to the pups. You brought hope to the kingdom. You brought love to me. You changed everything, Lydia. And I'll spend the rest of my life being grateful for you." Lydia leaned back against him and felt tears slip down her cheeks. But they were happy tears, grateful tears. "I love you," she whispered. "I love you too," Hobbs said. "Forever." They stood together on the balcony, watching the kingdom celebrate, and Lydia felt something settle deep inside her soul. This was her life now. This was her home. This was her family. She was no longer the Omega they rejected. She was the woman who'd saved the Alpha King's children. She was the mate who'd changed a kingdom. She was the mother who'd chosen love over rank, connection over power, and belonging over everything else. And in the end, that was all that mattered. Love. Family. Home. The Omega they rejected had become the heart they needed. And the Alpha King's future was brighter because of it.